Most of us have heard of Adam and Eve, the first couple in the Bible, part of the Abrahamic creation myth. And in the Indo-European traditions, there are couples too. They can be found in the Old Norse Askr and Embla, the Vedic Yama and Yamĩ, and the Iranian Mašya and Mašyānag. These couples are made from trees or rocks, bones or dragon's teeth, or similar items that were lying around when the god or gods decided to make them. But the human origin myth in Roman, Germanic and Indo-Iranian sources suggests a much more complex story behind these couples. In effect, it suggests their origins may be as twins. So welcome to the story of the twins of creation, and welcome to Krakenford. So within creation myths, we have this pairing of people at the beginning, and the pairing of influence of elements. For example, the Iranian and Icelandic myths contain fire and ice at the beginning, and in Old Norse we have the realms of Niflheim and Muspelheim colliding, the realms of ice and fire, and the Yamaziastas Vara talks of men sheltering from the cosmic winter. And if we skip to the end of the world, this pairing disappears. The Icelandic Ragnarok, the Iranian Frascrat, and the biblical apocalypse all end in fire, gods versus demons or giants and monsters. There is no need for ice as part of the destruction myth. And do you ever wonder why? The fire and ice coming together is key to the Norse myth. It enables the creation of Ymir, a cosmic primordial being, an androgyny, and a name that means twin. The fate of Ymir was to be carved up by Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve, and his body parts were used to create the world, a myth that has obvious connections to the proto-indo-european creation myth, and so also relates to the creation myths of the Near East. But if we look further back in time, at Germania, via the writings in Tacitus in the 1st century CE, we see a similar mythology but formed from a different being, an earthborn being, or as Tacitus writes, a terra editus, of man's proto-ancestor called Tuisto. And Tuisto had a son called Mannus, and Mannus had 3 broods, the Ingevones, the Herminones, and the Oestivones. And the names are important as Tuisto means twin, and Mannus means man, and the 3 groups of children of Mannus represent the social divisions in ancient Germania of the tribes. But this all raises a question. If Tuisto or Ymir means twin, then whose twin was Tuisto or Ymir? It could be argued that as an androgyny, these beings were their own twin. But looking eastwards and the region of the proto-indo-european source myth and beyond, and I'll discuss these creation myths in more detail in this video, we can see in the Rig Veda 1090 that Purusa was cut apart to make the world of men, and specifically that of the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas and Sudras. And yet, behind Purusa is the Vedic Yama, a name that is again cognate with twin like Ymir, and his brother Manu, cognate with Mannus, and also meaning man. Manu introduced sacrifice and religious law to the Vedic world. Now in the Vedic myth, Yama had a twin wife, Manavi, who he said to have sacrificed. But if we strip away this part of the myth, we are left with Yama and Manu, the primordial twins, with Manu sacrificing Yama for the act of creation. In effect, man sacrificed his twin. So between the Old Norse, Germania and India, we have 2 myths that look as though they have branched out from the same source. And I'll put up a graphical representation of this now. So here we have 3 myths from the Old Norse, Germania and India. And I'll highlight the primordial being, the androgyny or twin, now. All these myths then show one man sacrificing the primordial being, and I'll highlight that person now. And that person then goes on to create people. And I hope this makes it clearer that these must have come from a single source, which is the proto-indo-european creation myth. With this knowledge of myth from the Old Norse and Germania, and from Iran and India, we can apply this to the founding of Rome, a story I told a few weeks back in this video, and the myth of the twins of Romulus and Remus. Now this is an interesting comparison because the Roman culture is a main source of comparative mythology, and so to apply this model of creation from other cultures to Rome highlights a couple of problems with the use of this myth. And I can show the problem in this diagram, where it looks as though part of the twin kills itself, and so it looks as though perhaps this story isn't part of the Indo-European creation myths. Now, the first problem we have is that any classic story for the founding of a city requires just one name. And with Romulus and Remus, we have the Romans leveraging this twin myth and applying it to Rome. But why? Could it be they're just leveraging a twin motif from Greek mythology, where plenty of such motifs exist? Or is there more going on here? Well, Greek scholars wrote about Romulus and Remus as Remos and Romulus, with the former being the name for Rome and the latter meaning Roman. So what does this tell us about Remus, or the lack of Remus? It suggests that Remus, which isn't derived from Rome or Roma, and who is the twin who is killed in the foundation of Rome, it suggests that Remus is a name that must have come from somewhere less obvious, and as such is more archaic in nature due to coming from an almost certainly older and more obscure source. And what is Romulus and Remus's myth anyway? Is it a quarrel of two brothers like Cain and Abel? Or is it a breach of city walls, as it refers to in the often quoted myth version by Levi, in which one brother aggravates another brother into killing him? Well, again, there is another possibility, and that is that the killing of Remus could be seen as a blood sacrifice in the establishment of a new city. In this way, it would explain why a creation myth came to be the myth about the founding of a city, in effect making it part of the history of the city, in a culture that may well have lost the original ritual for a creation myth. We can show, for example, that the Roman myth took a lot from Greek myth, which took a lot from Persian myth, and both the Greek and the Persian myths took some myth from Indo-European sources. And so the Roman myths have a more complex arrangement in its ancestry than some of the other cultures. There is also evidence to suggest that Remus was the primary partner of his twin, this set of figures, and this would affect how we understand the twin relationship. You see, in older Roman texts, the story is not known as Romulus and Remus, but de Remo e Romulo, meaning Remus and Romulus. It only changed when the great scholars of Cicero and Varro declared a solid plot in the myth in their works, dictating that the twins were Romulus and Remus, and this was documented and copied many times, establishing that myth with the names reversed. But before this, Romans were often known as Remi Repotes, meaning descendants of Rome, and the implications of this is that the senior of Romulus and Remus, Remus, as his name associates with Remi, Remus died at the hands of the younger or less senior twin to allow for the creation of Rome. In effect, the name Romulus is a far younger name than Remus. It was literally created to mean Rome. And so if you compare this with the Germanic Tuisto and Mannus, or Vedic Yama and Manu, then Remus is the twin and Romulus is the man. Tuisto, Yama and Remus are the more senior of the relationship with their counterparts, and so this affords them to become part of the origin and history of the cosmos of the myths they are part of, much like the Old Norse Ymir and the Vedic Purusa too. This makes them what we call demo figures, characters that, when they die, end the sacred timing cosmological myth, and as such are considered very significant figures. But whilst Romulus and Remus, the story is a crude form of the creation myth, there are other versions of it written, including one where Romulus is killed by senators and his body is chopped up and carried away. That's a fate that is similar to Ymir and Purusa, amongst other primordial beings. But this fate of being chopped up falls against Romulus rather than Remus. So why is this? Well, a man can only be killed once, and with Remus killed by Romulus, he can't be killed again within the myth. That would break the story. And so this is his twin, and his twin has to be killed. And that's just part of logical storytelling. But the story may still not be quite as simple as that. And that is because if we look at the names of the twin and man in Proto-Roman, we get the names Yemos and Wironos, or with the argumentative suffix Ymonos and Wironos. Now, Ymonos survives in Old Irish today in Ivin and Latin Geminus, both meaning twin, and this shows that Yem's prefix in Latin disappeared, being replaced by Gem. And probably through alliterative association with Romulus, Remus was born from Gemos, which came from Yemos, thus allowing the twin link with Romulus. In effect, Romulus and Gemos didn't sound poetic enough, and so became Romulus and Remus. And on the other side of Yemos and Wironos, Wiros became Vir in Latin. So Wironos became Virinus and eventually Wironos. And this is important because the name of the deified Romulus is Quirinus, which is simply a compound of co-Virinus. It was thought that the deified Romulus and Quirinus were brought together at a later date, but here we see that Romulus came from Quirinus much earlier on through Wironos, developing into the hero myth of Romulus, a hero that needed an end, and a quartering of the body by the Senate was hardly a story suitable for Rome, and thus the Greek influence of linking a god to a hero, that's called apotheosis, making a hero a god, was borrowed, and thus Romulus became a god as opposed to being allowed to die by being chopped up. And so we can show that, in conclusion, the recreation of the proto-indo-European creation myth thus rests on the foundation built not only through Yama and Manu in India and Tuisto and Mannus in Germania, but also Ymir and Wironos in Rome. And behind these pairings we have the primordial Purusa, Tiamat and Ymir, and now Romulus, proving that proto-indo-European link and reinforcing the twin myth of creation. A myth perhaps that is still alive in more modern times, as Romulus, the man who was cut up in the Senate, offers the same scene as the time when in Shakespeare's Brutus, Julius Caesar says, "Let's carve him a dish fit for the gods." You see, even in modern times, there perhaps lay remnants of the proto-indo-European creation myth and the primordial sacrifice of the cosmic twin. And so I hope you enjoyed that journey through the creation myth and the proto-indo-European twin, and establishing it actually exists in Old Norse, Germania, Vedic and the Roman myths. And I'll put some references in the description below of where I've got some of this information if you're interested. Jan Puvel's Comparative Mythology twin chapter is a significant resource for this. So hope you found that interesting, and until the next video, please stay safe and stay well. And this was Crekenford.